In 1929, the world learned how fast prosperity can turn into panic. One morning, Wall Street was unstoppable. By nightfall, it was rubble. Fortunes vanished like vapor. Banks locked their doors. The air itself seemed to tighten, as if the world had stopped breathing. Most believed that crisis was buried with its century, sealed inside black and white photos and dusty textbooks. But it wasn't. The ghost never died. It learned to hide inside data, policies, and apps. Behind charts and quarterly reports, it waits, silent, watching. What if it never really ended? What if the same spirit of leverage, greed, and faith in endless growth still moves beneath our feet, invisible, but alive? Look around. You feel it when your paycheck runs, but prices sprint, when the rent climbs faster than the raise, when debt multiplies like shadows in the dark. What's happening isn't random. It's not chaos. It's a rhythm, one the world has danced to before. The pulse of prosperity, followed by the silence of collapse. The same pattern that haunted our grandparents now hides in our phones, our markets, our daily hopes. Before we go deeper, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from, and what time is it for you right now? I love seeing how far these stories travel, because this isn't just history. It's global memory, repeating, reframed, reborn. Now let's go back to 1929. The world glowed then, a golden age shimmering on the edge of illusion. Electric lights spilled across Broadway. Radio carried laughter from jazz clubs to lonely farms. Stock tickers rattled like rain, endless, musical, intoxicating. Every headline promised a new era of wealth. Factories hummed, automobiles gleamed. Ordinary men became speculators, borrowing against tomorrow to buy more of today. It felt unstoppable, a civilization convinced it had outsmarted risk. Technology was booming, credit was cheap, confidence was currency, and faith in the market replaced faith in anything higher. But the foundation was air, debt stacked on debt, belief stacked on belief, until the entire system floated, weightless, untethered from reality. In the cafes of New York, waiters traded stock tips. Teachers bought shares on margin. Bankers toasted to infinite growth. No one asked where the money came from. They only asked how to make more of it. It was an age drunk on optimism. And like every intoxication, the hangover was waiting, quietly counting down. Because illusion doesn't die with time. It adapts. It updates. It finds new symbols, new screens, new believers. Every generation swears it's different. Every boom calls itself innovation. Every bubble claims to be progress. But every age, every single age, calls its bubble progress. Debt stacked on debt. Optimism built on borrowed money. Credit became the bloodstream of prosperity, pulsing through homes, factories, and trading floors. Every dollar was promised twice, once to the lender, once to the dreamer. Debt is oxygen for growth until it fills the room. What everyone called progress was really pressure. The crash that came wasn't a lightning strike. It was slow suffocation. The air had been thinning for years. People just didn't notice until they couldn't breathe. Liquidity is water poured into a leaking barrel. It buys time, not safety. In 1929, the leaks were banks and brokers. In our time, it's entire nations. Central banks flood the system with new money to keep markets alive, hoping it will reach the real economy. But water doesn't climb uphill. It pools at the top, in balance sheets and assets, while the ground below stays dry. Prices rise, confidence returns, and leaders celebrate stability. Yet nothing in the structure has been repaired. You can flood a system with money, but not with trust. The markets of both eras were fueled by the same illusion. That liquidity equals solvency, that movement equals health. In truth, both are disguises. A body can keep moving after the heart has stopped. Momentum hides decay. Markets rise on faith, not math. That faith is fragile. It only takes one spark of doubt for it to unravel, thread by thread. Let's bring it closer. Imagine a family in December. The lights are up, the kids are excited, but the father just opened a letter from the bank. The mortgage rate reset, up 2%. The rent on the small apartment his sister lives in jumped again. Groceries cost 20% more than last year. The credit card balance is near the limit. They cancel the trip, delay the repairs, cut corners quietly. From the outside, they still smile, still pretend. Inside, the invisible hand tightens. Their crisis isn't personal, it's structural. When confidence shrinks, wallets follow. Now scale that story 1,000,000 times. When households contract, spending falls. When spending falls, profits shrink. When profits shrink, layoffs begin. Confidence evaporates in reverse order. Bottom first, top last. The chain is invisible until it breaks. The same pattern played out in 1929. The same rhythm echoes now. And while the middle strains, the top ascends. In 1929, the top 1% owned more wealth than the bottom 90 combined. Today, that imbalance is worse. The script hasn't changed, only the set. Same script, new stage, bigger stakes. Inequality isn't a glitch, it's the mechanism. Cheap credit builds illusions of comfort for the many and capital leverage for the few. The closer you are to the faucet, the earlier you drink. That's proximity. The quiet law that compounds advantage. Picture 3 circles. In the inner ring sit the central banks, the institutions that create money from policy. The next ring holds investors and corporations, those who receive liquidity first, through loans, bonds, and markets. The outer ring is everyone else, workers, families, small businesses, living on what trickles down, long after prices have adjusted upward. Proximity decides who gains first and who pays later. When stimulus flows, it reaches the center before the edges. When inflation hits, it burns the edges before the center. It's the same current, just reversed. Closer to the source, profits come first. Farther, prices do. And this is the structure of illusion, a system where distance from the source determines your survival. In 1929, that distance was measured in streets from Wall Street. Today, it's measured in milliseconds, in trading algorithms, in who receives the notification first. The ghost doesn't need a ticker tape anymore. It rides fiber optics and policy statements. Every fix, every rescue, every rate cut or liquidity injection strengthens its reach. What began as a local panic has evolved into a global architecture of belief, one that depends entirely on trust and one tremor away from collapse. This is the new anatomy of debt. The skeleton is leverage. The blood is liquidity. The heartbeat is confidence, and the disease is denial. It breathes, adapts, and hides behind growth, the same way it did a century ago. The ghost has learned to code, but it still haunts the same house. Speculation was once visible. You could see it in crowded stock exchanges, in men shouting prices until their voices broke. Today, it's digital, silent, frictionless, invisible. Algorithms trade faster than thought. Phones flash with charts no one truly understands. The frenzy no longer sounds like chaos. It hums like progress. Every tap, every buy order, every scrolling line feels controlled, managed by data, governed by logic. But beneath that calm pulse lives the same fever that burned through 1929. The screen has replaced the ticker tape, not the psychology. This time is different, they say. Different tools, different technology, different safeguards, but belief itself hasn't changed, only its costume. In every era, people mistake new instruments for new immunity. They forget that speculation isn't about assets, it's about faith. It's the conviction that prices can rise forever because we've learned how to prevent the fall. That illusion grows stronger the more times we survive a small crash. Each recovery becomes proof that the system works, when in truth, it only proves how deep our denial runs. So how do you know when history is repeating? There's a checklist. 3 signs appear before every reckoning. First, debt rises faster than income. Households, companies, and governments borrowing to maintain the illusion of prosperity. Second, valuations outrun productivity. Markets celebrate price, not progress. Third, policy becomes rescue, not reform. Leaders focus on saving appearances, not addressing cause. When all 3 align, the pattern is complete. When rescue feels normal, danger feels distant. That's where we are now, comforted by the routine of emergency. Every intervention becomes a ritual. Rates cut, liquidity added, speeches made. We call it stability, but it's repetition disguised as control. The machine of denial runs on habit. Each time it spins, it convinces us that the next cycle will be softer, safer, smarter. Arithmetic doesn't lie, but faith rewrites the math. And now the contagion isn't local. In 1929, panic traveled by telegram. Now it moves at the speed of code. Today it's global. A shock in one market ripples across continents before the headlines even print. The same current that connects economies also carries their fear. Servers blink like heartbeats, flashing signals of risk from New York to Frankfurt to Shanghai. A rumor becomes a flash crash. A hesitation in confidence becomes a global chill. Capital has no borders, but neither does panic. The internet pulse mirrors the old ticker. Every blip, every spike, another heartbeat of the same system. Each nation thinks its safeguards are unique. Yet every line on the chart bends the same way when trust wavers. The system doesn't collapse from one failure, it fractures when millions of invisible threads tighten at once. In 1929, those threads were paper loans and telegrams. In 2025, they're fiber optics and derivatives. The form evolves. The fragility doesn't. Across the map, the echoes multiply. In America, the housing market cools as interest rates rise, freezing buyers mid-step. In Europe, corporate bonds crumble under the weight of cheap debt that was never meant to last. In Asia, a digital bank halts withdrawals after liquidity evaporates overnight. Different geographies, same route, leverage and confidence intertwined. The network built to spread prosperity now multiplies risk. A local crack now echoes worldwide. Every tremor exposes how connected we've become and how unprepared we are for the chain reaction. Policymakers call for calm, promising tools to contain the shock. But their tools are the same ones that inflated it. To print more money or raise rates, both have costs. Liquidity cures symptoms, not structure. Higher rates restore faith, but starve growth. Each cure weakens another organ. The global economy has become a patient living on stimulants, alert, functional, addicted. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe the structure can hold if discipline returns before denial collapses. Maybe we rediscover balance between debt and productivity, risk and reward. But discipline requires pain, and modern politics no longer tolerates it. We anesthetize every tremor, mistaking numbness for strength. We forget that systems don't fail because of greed alone. They fail because no one admits the fever. Every fix plants the seed of the next crisis. Each bailout writes the blueprint for another bubble. That's the irony of our progress. The smarter the system becomes, the faster it repeats its own mistakes. We say, never again, yet our algorithms trade like gamblers at the same table. We say, we learned, yet our confidence still blinds. Complacency builds. Arithmetic doesn't lie. History doesn't repeat. It rhymes, and the rhythm is accelerating. The denial machine doesn't exist in governments or banks alone. It exists in us, in every belief that tomorrow will correct itself, that growth will always return, that numbers can bend forever without breaking. It's in the silence after the headline fades, in the comfort of thinking someone else is watching. But no one is. The ghost of 1929 hums quietly in the circuits of 2025, still feeding on the same promise, that this time, finally, will be different. After the crash of 1929, the world searched for control. Laws were written, institutions born, promises made. Out of ruin came reform, the FDIC to protect depositors, the New Deal to rebuild confidence, and the rise of social safety nets to guard the fragile middle. It worked, at least for a time. Stability returned. People believed the system could now be managed, engineered, even perfected. But every safeguard carried a hidden clause. When risk becomes public and reward stays private, safety turns illusion. Once governments learned they could cushion the fall, markets learned they could jump higher. The lesson of stability became a license for recklessness. Moral hazard is the invisible inheritance of 1929. In the decades that followed, policymakers swore they had tamed the cycle. The memory of panic faded, the appetite for debt returned. Each generation of leaders faced the same dilemma, whether to accept small pain now or greater pain later. Most chose later. It was politically safer, socially quieter, and psychologically comforting. After all, who wants to tell the public that the cure will hurt? And so, we built an economy addicted to rescue. Every downturn demanded stimulus. Every bubble begged salvation. The act of saving the system became the system itself. Then came the age of inflation tolerance, a silent pact between policymakers and markets. They learned to fear deflation more than distortion. Falling prices kill faster than rising ones, they argued. So mild inflation became acceptable, predictable, necessary. What began as an emergency measure became doctrine. We traded falling prices for rising illusion. The printing press became the heartbeat of confidence, each new wave of money washing away old mistakes. But inflation isn't policy. It's the price of denial. It's the slow bleeding of value disguised as progress. It rewards those who borrow and punishes those who save. It transfers quietly from effort to asset, from work to wealth. And as long as the illusion holds, no one complains. For a moment, let's consider the other side. What if we're not doomed? What if this time we could actually learn? The path isn't mysterious. It's just difficult. Real productivity must rise faster than debt. Debt itself must be restructured, not extended. Fiscal discipline must replace political theater. If nations can produce more than they promise, if we can value balance over velocity, then maybe the ghost can rest. But these are not easy conditions. They demand restraint in an age that rewards excess. They demand honesty in a world built on optimism. Discipline is the only vaccine, yet discipline rarely survives comfort. As prosperity grows, memory fades. That's the paradox that keeps the cycle alive. Before every collapse, people feel safest. Before every reckoning, leaders sound most confident. We measure progress by how long the calm lasts, not by how real the foundation is. The longer the silence, the sharper. The shatter. Complacency builds. And then one day, something breaks. The pattern is always the same. First comes the denial, a refusal to see fragility for what it is. Then comes rationalization, the belief that small corrections mean stability. Finally comes surprise, the inevitable moment when arithmetic asserts itself. Numbers don't negotiate. History doesn't forget. What failed in 1929 failed again in 2008, and the same structure trembles now. We rescue, we recover, we repeat. The tragedy isn't that we don't know what to do. It's that we do know, and still can't do it. Every generation inherits both the tools and the temptations of those before it. Our tools have grown stronger. Data, models, algorithms. But so have our illusions. We manage crises faster but refuse to prevent them. We track risk in real time but ignore the moral one. We talk about markets as if they were weather. Natural, uncontrollable, inevitable. Yet every gust is human. Every storm begins with choice. The cycle of denial is not economic. It's emotional. It's the comfort of believing that complexity itself guarantees safety. We trust in oversight, in intelligence, in innovation. The very same words used in 1928. The belief that we've evolved beyond collapse is the most dangerous illusion of all. When systems grow too intricate to fail, they grow too fragile to fix. And so, we return to the same truth hidden beneath every chart and policy speech. No amount of engineering can remove risk without removing honesty. Stability without integrity is only delay. Confidence without discipline is only debt. We may not relive 1929 in form, but its pattern, the denial, the overreach, the reckoning, still moves through us like an inherited pulse. The ghost isn't haunting our past. It's living in our routine. Out of ruin came reform. Out of despair came resolve. When the dust of 1929 finally settled, the world did not disappear. It reinvented itself. Governments learned to listen. Workers learned to organize. Economies learned to adapt. The FDIC ensured deposits. The New Deal rebuilt confidence. Safety nets were woven across generations. Humanity, bruised but breathing, discovered something essential. Resilience begins when denial ends. From every failure, something was born. Regulation, awareness, humility, however brief. The cycle of pain had carved memory into the system, and for a while we remembered. But memory fades faster than fear, and when comfort returned, so did the illusion. We adapt, or collapse repeats. That truth doesn't belong only to nations or markets. It belongs to you. Because the same psychology that drives bubbles and crashes on Wall Street lives inside every household, every decision, every loan, every swipe of a card. The macro becomes micro in 1,000 small choices. So before the next shock comes, before confidence turns to panic, run your own audit. Ask not what the markets are doing. Ask what you are depending on. Check your leverage. How much of what you own is truly yours? How much is rented from tomorrow? Measure your distance from the source. Are you close to the flow of money, or standing downstream, where prices arrive before opportunity? Count your cash, not your comfort. Comfort deceives, liquidity saves. When paychecks falter or rates rise, comfort disappears faster than courage. Know your rate risk. If the cost of borrowing doubles, can you still stand? Examine your dependencies. Is your income tied to one stream, one client, one promise? Protect your reserves. A safety net is not paranoia, it's preparation. These questions are simple, but they cut deep. They reveal not wealth, but fragility. The same pattern that topples empires begins quietly, with overconfidence, with borrowed ease, with faith that tomorrow will fix what today ignores. Reduce leverage before the market does it for you. Because when the tide goes out, it's not the reckless who fall first. It's the unprepared. Comfort is easier than correction. It always has been. The world would rather postpone than confront, and individuals are no different. We keep small illusions for the same reason nations keep big ones. They make life feel manageable. We tell ourselves the bills will even out, that promotions will come, that someone somewhere is steering the ship. But comfort is a slow drug. It dulls reaction. It teaches blindness. And when the correction finally comes, it feels sudden only because we refuse to look. Silence follows awareness. 3 seconds of pause, 3 beats of truth. Comfort is the quiet before the reckoning. Now look again. Not at 1929, but at 2025. History isn't in the past, it's a mirror, and we're still inside it. Every reflection shows the same pattern. Faces different. Forces familiar. The charts have changed shape, but the emotions haven't. The same overconfidence glows behind our screens, the same belief that central banks can suspend gravity, that technology can rewrite cycles, that this time is evolution, not repetition. But look closely. The light in 1929's photograph is the same glow on your phone. The tickers have become apps. The lines of credit have become pixels. The ghost hasn't vanished. It's digitized. A century apart, 2 worlds stare at each other across the mirror. They trade the same excuses, the same hopes, the same silence before the fall. History doesn't repeat, but it reflects. And every reflection is a warning. So what do we do with that warning? We remember. We adapt. We build discipline not from fear, but from awareness. The next crisis isn't an inevitability. It's a test of attention, a test of honesty, a test of whether we can see through illusion before it cracks. The greatest defense isn't wealth or policy. It's clarity. The ability to look at the system, the headlines, your own life, and separate faith from fact. Because in the end, resilience isn't built in booms. It's built in pauses. In the moments when we stop believing everything will fix itself. The system survives when its participants do, and survival begins with self-awareness. That's not alarmism. It's realism. Every investor, every worker, every citizen stands at the intersection of 2 economies, one external, one internal. The first reacts to numbers. The second reacts to fear. Both rise and fall on confidence. The only question is, whose confidence collapses first? If this made you think differently, share your view. Are we wiser now, or just dressed better? Are we genuinely safer, or merely more sophisticated in our denial? The markets may speak in numbers, but meaning speaks in voices, yours included. Tell me what you see when you look at your own reflection in this cycle. Because history isn't over, it never was. It's repeating in slow motion, digitized, monetized, globalized. The ghost of 1929 walks among us not as a memory, but as a mirror. It doesn't frighten to haunt. It warns to teach. And if we listen closely, it whispers the same line it's whispered for 100 years. Measure trust before you chase growth. The music fades, the screen darkens, and the rhythm slows to silence. The same 3 notes that began this story, returning to close it. What began as panic becomes pattern, and what began as illusion becomes insight. The cycle remains, but awareness bends its shape. Out of denial, renewal. Out of collapse, understanding. Out of noise, stillness. The ghost of 1929 will always linger, but perhaps this time we finally hear what it's been trying to say.